Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about School Spirits, Season 1, Episode 3. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, immediately picking up where the last episode left off, we have Simon's confrontation. Well, not confrontation, but him running into Anderson, and Anderson telling him, like, no, just go. Why were you here? And Simon's like, why were you here? And he's just like, well, goodbye, Simon. So it puts him in like a little bit of a suspicious lane, but then we get like a flash of something we later on get context for. It was the car accident situation. We got flashes of that early on, but we had no context for it because it turns out even Simon doesn't know about all that went down. But it turns out that Maddie and Anderson have a pretty decent relationship. So now Simon still hasn't removed Xavier from the suspect board, but at the very least, he's kind of doubled down in this particular episode with Anderson because it's like, yeah, it was kind of weird him rolling up on us like that. You know, why was he there and stuff? And it turns out that Anderson was someone that Maddie could rely on. Part of me was wondering, was it almost kind of like that father figure to some extent because she didn't have her father in her life for a long time. So I wonder, did that kind of happen? They didn't really get into that, so that might not fully be it. It's just having an adult be able to kind of be helping you out, especially considering all that Maddie had to do with her mom, because she had to be the adult in the situation. She had to look after her mom. She had to take care of her mom in so many different ways. It was kind of probably nice to be able to rely on someone else in that regard. So she doesn't have the same view of Anderson the way Simon does. And Simon's like, right, at the very least, we can keep an eye on both of them. But Maddie got upset when she found out that Simon, decided to not only keep an eye on Anderson, but also break into his car. We find out why it was so important to her is because she was in a car accident, and the moment she was like, yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention, I was like, that doesn't seem like that's the case. I was like, if anything, I was expecting your mom, and later on we find out that's exactly what happened. Her mom was behind the wheel, she was drinking, and she crashed a car, and Maddie is going to take the fall for it. So wanted to make sure her mom was nowhere near this, so she ended up calling Anderson to help out. Because Anderson opened up to her, he knew kind of what her home situation was, and he's like, yeah, I get what it's like living two lives. And he pulls out a sobriety chip, but it's not his own, it's his dad's. He keeps that as a reminder that it isn't just, it's kind of one day at a time, not only for the person that's drinking, but for the people in their lives that it kind of affects, like the people who have to kind of help them out. So living that dual life of, yeah, because she's falling asleep in class, because she's tired, because she's got to do so much for her mom. And her mom knows that. That's why she has so many regrets. It's like, right, she was always there for me when I was kind of drowning my sorrows. And now it's like, yeah, I just never expected one day she'd leave and never come back, you know? And I'd never see her kind of walk through those doors again. So that's some commonality between Anderson and Maddie. But even later on, Simon's like, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, well, because it turns out that she knew Simon knew some of the stuff that she was going through, but if she saw everything, she was afraid it was going to scare Simon away. And it's like, right, this is one of your closest friends. I wonder, does Nicole, because once again, I think Simon and her probably grew up, they've known each other for a while. Maybe that's the case, because it seemed like she's tight with Nicole and Simon, but it seems like she probably, Simon knows more of the uglier stuff. I don't know if Nicole does, though. So I don't know if that, because it seems like they might be more recent besties, whereas her and Simon were besties for a while. Because I could have sworn he had some line of dialogue either in the first or second episode about how he knows her better than she knows herself, or at least kind of made it imply like they've been best friends for a very long time, but maybe it hasn't been a very, very long time. But yeah, the point was she didn't want to scare away Simon. And the sad thing is that actually led to them kind of having a falling out in the episode, because it's like, right, you won't listen to me. But for Simon's like, yeah, but you won't open up. And it took a while for her to finally be comfortable enough to kind of tell him everything about the accident with her mom, why she called Anderson, why she felt like she could rely on him more than Simon in that regard, because it was easier to talk to a stranger. It's one of those things where sometimes it's easier to vent to a stranger, someone that's willing to help you, who you're kind of fine with them not being as much in your life, but the fact is she was scared that she'd end up scaring Simon off, and he's kind of like such a staple part of her life. When her life is so in flux, having some stability like Simon and Nicole, it kind of evened out all the craziness of her life, you know? We also find out that the ghosts handle things. They're like the support group, you know, they help Maddie go through what she's going through. They basically take like a month. I don't know if it's like once every month or something. They basically go on a you know, which, you know, it's like one of those rooms where you go in and smash stuff to alleviate some frustrations. It's like that, but they do it in the field. And I thought that was so interesting how they kind of play with the metaphysicalness of it all as they keep talking about in this episode. That obviously, like, because at first I was like, oh man, everything looks trash. I was like, oh well, things just eventually reset, and that's the case. You know, they can interact with the world, but eventually, like, everything pops back. It's almost like they take a copy of something the moment they grab it, and they're doing all they can. But then, like, yeah, you're only affecting this world for a temporary amount of time. It's almost like a little temporal zone where it's just like, yeah, you can affect everything, you can trash, you can burn stuff, but then it will automatically always go back to where it was. I think as long as you're no longer interacting with it, the world will always like snap back. I guess the less you're interacting with it, the more quickly it'll snap back. You know, just like when she kept ripping the pages off the lockers, but they were causing such mayhem, scurrying around, and it's like, yeah, because like it probably just varies, but everything always goes back because, as Rhonda makes a point of, once again, nothing ever changes here. But yeah, Maddie was smashing up the place because of her fight with Simon, and she had talked to talked to Charlie about it, and Charlie's like, right, if you're gonna deal with something like that, might as well talk to Rhonda. She would know better than anyone, having been in a situation of, once again, getting murdered by her guidance counselor. Well, she opens up a little bit, and there's a lot of parallels between her circumstance and Maddie's. And even, it's like, oh, you think my situation will help you solve yours? And Maddie was like, I hope that's not the case. But she needs answers. She wants to know, like, the connection she had with Anderson. Was it like, hey, I'm putting my trust in this adult who's actually helping me, who cares about me in a very respectful, trying to be there for me way? Or did they see it as something else? Because that's exactly what happened in Rhonda's point. Because for her, it's like, my dad was a pencil pusher. My mom, like, was just so focused on, like, the house and like the garden and stuff like that. Like, I was just never seen until her guidance counselor. He's the one, was it like Manfredo or something like that? It's like, he saw me and he helped me and he guided me so much. And obviously, like, her future, they were kind of planning it out and stuff like that. But the problem is, one day she's like, yeah, I got my acceptance letters. And it's like, right, he went kind of cold in a sense, because he saw things one way and I saw them another. Now, I don't know if she was interpreting that as like he felt like oh, you're leaving me behind type of thing, of like, oh, you got accepted into these colleges or whatever, you're going to leave me behind. Or she was like, no, we're a thing, like, we're going to stick together, like, that's what but she didn't read the situation like that. Very much like Maddie, it's like, oh, you're just someone I can rely on during a tough time in my life. And he ended up, like, they argued and she was going to leave, and she's like, well, let's just say maybe just to keep this from getting too, like, descriptively violent, they avoid, like, because we don't know, well, we know, like, how Wally died. Obviously it was an accident. We know how Charlie died. It was an allergic reaction. But they've kind of avoided, like, well, obviously we don't know how Maddie died because we know there was blood, but there's no body. Rhonda went out of her way not to explain, like, how she died. So I think they don't want to lean into, like, the murder itself. I mean, it happened, that's a thing, but they don't want to lean into the details of it. So I think that maybe that kind of, I don't know what I wasn't paying attention to what the rating for the show is. Like, if it's like I don't think it's a mature. I'm sure it's like maybe a TV-14, so maybe kind of lessening those details, like, kind of keeps it on that TV-14, like, PG-13 lane of things. I don't know. Or maybe that's just like a creative choice of like, yeah, we don't want to lean into like the murder and how it happened because it's not important. It's irrelevant. And maybe that's even more so why Rhonda doesn't bring up. She's just like, yeah, I did leave the classroom. It's like, why focus on how I died? Because it's irrelevant. I'm dead, you know? So maybe that's what it is. And it's like, oh, what, did they ever catch him? And it's like, oh yeah, they caught him. And he died in prison, but it's like, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything because nothing changes here. It didn't make her feel any better. It didn't bring her back to life. It's just kind of like, it's, you know, it's almost trying to give Maddie that perspective that it's like, no matter what you want, it's not going to play out the way it's not going to, you think like figuring this all out is going to solve anything, but you're still, when it's all said and done, even if you figure it out, you're most likely still going to be stuck here for years like everyone else. So, for one, it was nice getting Rhonda to kind of open up, because Rhonda, she talked about it once again. She talks about everything so flippantly. I brought it up last episode, because they brought it up in episode 1, but I talked, because I forgot to talk about it, so I talked about it in episode 2. It was like, once again, the whole point of, yeah, kind of, eventually you might laugh about the fact is you died or got murdered. Like, you can kind of laugh about it, you kind of have to, eventually, like, it's better than kind of the alternative type of situation, so. And I really appreciate Wally being the one that kind of helped, Maddie through her, like, frustrations. And, you know, it was like, right, taking the cartwheel around and stuff like that, her going off and smashing stuff. He was, like, super pumped. I mean, it's the day he kind of looks forward to the most and stuff, so. I mean, just being the jock that he is and stuff like that, but I think that probably also begets, like, some more deeper issues he's kind of dealing with. Like, once again, not everyone's trying to make do in their own regards, so. Because he's the one that doesn't seem like, I mean, they all kind of handle their situations. Once again, they're further in their processes than Maddie is. Once again, this is all still super fresh. So, but I think each one of them kind of handles it with a little more, they all have like a little more levity with their circumstances, because they've had years and years to deal with it. You know, kind of accepted and stuff like that. But I still know there's a part of them that haven't fully accepted it. But I feel like maybe Wally exerts it the most of like, yeah, I'm okay. Whereas, like, everyone else, I think, has done a better job of kind of not as much. Like, Rhonda, she will make jokes, but she opened up this episode. We've seen that vulnerability with Charlie when he was around Emilio. So, we've seen that. Only person we hadn't quite seen that with yet was Wally. So, we've yet to see that too. But I think eventually we will get kind of some opening ups from him about kind of his feelings and how he's processing everything in totality. So we had Xavier going back to school. He talks to Nicole about it later, but it's like, yeah, I don't need to stay home, because like, yeah, he had talked about like there was an eyewitness that says like it couldn't have been him. Like they saw him somewhere else at the time Maddie might have disappeared. Because I completely forgot to talk about this last episode. Simon had said like the last time, like Maddie's mom said like, oh, Maddie went to go find her mom, but she never met up with her. Her mom was like, yeah, I never saw Maddie. So it's like, yeah, you had to have like died at some point between then and 8th period. So that had to be when you died. But for Maddie, all she can remember is walking in the hallway, and then afterwards it's a blank. Why is it everything up there? Not even just straight up to your murder, just like everything leading, like some time before your murder is still a blank to you too. Why is that? Like, where did you go? What's happening there? And obviously this ties into Anderson, because Simon ended up breaking into Anderson's car, and it turns out that piece of what might have been Maddie's phone ended up, he never turned it in, which, you know, it's like, why would you keep that? And Simon kind of confronted him, like, what? Without telling him, like, oh, I broke in your car. And I know for a fact, it's like, oh, did you turn it over to the cops? He's like, and he was like, right, I'm keeping it until I know who to trust. Well, some other interesting discoveries before we, well, I'll circle back to the Xavier and Nicole element later in a little bit, but Simon, and Maddie ended up discovering something interesting. Something Maddie ended up figuring out was that their classroom used to be the guidance counselor's room back in the day, back when Rhonda was there. But at some point, they built up a wall to separate the rooms. So now it is a situation of, now Maddie's like, oh, this makes sense why some places it's easier for us to see each other, for you to see me, than in others. Because like they did it earlier, they were kind of at like the bus stop. It seemed like it might have been like the bus stop or whatever. Well, I figured that would have to correlate with the marching band, because we know that they died around that area, maybe because of the accident, because obviously they're on school grounds, so it was relatively in the school area when they died. So I would assume kind of around there. But yeah, Rhonda died in the guidance counselor's room, so it's like the reason why Maddie and reason why Simon can see Maddie is specifically in places where someone died. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I wonder, is that applicable? Because it's not applicable to other people, I guess it has to be, you have to, like, that veil, because I guess death, as Simon says it, because he brought it up that the janitor said it last episode, this school has its scars. You have to go to a place that has scars, and you specifically have to be seen by someone that's holding on to you. Sadly, probably a lot of it, it's been so long, so Emilio probably doesn't hold on to Charlie that way. Because I'm like, Emilio would be the only person that would probably be able to see Charlie. But, like, those specific conditions have to be met. So those conditions might have existed at some point in time. It might be that thing of like, oh yeah, like maybe he's somewhere in Emilio's mind, but they just had to be specifically in the, place where people died for it to kind of register. I also didn't talk about it, but there's that weird-ass guidance counselor. Like, every time, like, Nicole's looking at her, she's looking at her and kind of smiling, and I'm like, why is that guidance counselor so creepy? It's like, well, we know one of the past guidance counselor, obviously. I don't know if we know it expressly, whoa. Because that was, like, Rhonda's from the 60s, isn't she? So, I mean, yeah, it was, like, decades ago, but still, it's just like, well, that's weird. No, she's not the guidance counselor, she's the grief counselor. I'm like, that's weird. So, either way, Simon and Maddie were listening in to a conversation that Anderson had when they were looking through some of his stuff. And it's like, wait, Maddie, like, you're a ghost, like, why are you hiding in here with me? And she's like, oh, right. She kind of did it out of instinct. And she couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he was talking about giving Maddie some money. But Maddie's like, I don't remember anything. It's like, did he give her money related to the car accident? And she doesn't remember. Because the car accident wasn't recently. That was, like, months ago that happened. So it's like, so what was that about? And then they find, like, a large stack of cash, whole bunch of cash. In like a secret compartment in like the I guess kind of storage room in the classroom or whatever. So it's like, why would a teacher have that much money? So once again, I don't think he's directly correlated to Maddie's murder, but there might be some indirect tangential connections. Like I said, I think he's got his own secrets that he's trying to bury. Once again, who was he on the phone with? Maybe it has something to do with the sheriff, because I feel like, well, that's the only person I could definitely see potentially talking to, especially because, like, when he was focusing on, like, the dogs sniffing around and stuff like that, I'm like, he knows something more. Like, I don't think he had anything directly to do with Maddie's death, but there is some connection. There's some secret he's keeping. And then, circling back a little bit, there's the other side of things where we had, Nicole, like, saw a photo that was from Maddie, and it was like, there was a specific photo, and it was liked by Maddie's account, so she went there thinking Maddie was there, like, maybe it had been a sign that, like, oh, Maddie was here or something like that, but no one was there. We find out how important that place is for Maddie. Like, this is a place she comes to just to kind of get away from life. And the fact is, she put her... When I saw the M and N, I was like, oh, like, Maddie and Nicole. I was like, oh, but it didn't cross my mind to be like, oh, I was like, oh, that's interesting. You would think you'd kind of separate that a little bit. It's like, no, it's Madison Near. I was like, I constantly forget, like, her last name begins with an N. But it was like her initials. Nicole drew a drawing. And we tied into this a little bit in the first episode about Nicole's, like, artistic talents and stuff, and how that could lead to her getting in some, like, really good colleges and programs and stuff. And it seems like she was accepted to a few because she sent her art out there, and they were kind of, like, celebratory about that. They were actually going to go celebrate because of that. So kind of getting some beginnings of that a little bit in this episode, where Maddie pointed out, like, oh, you're really good, you need to foster that art, you know, when it comes to college and stuff. But she's like, right, my parents don't have enough to send me to, like, one of those kind of artsy colleges. So, and she also doesn't have much faith in her own artistic ability. So, but Maddie did. So I think that's what meant a lot to her. It's like, I was pursuing my dreams. I do love art, being able to represent myself this way. And Maddie really pushed me for it. And all of a sudden, Xavier shows up because he, you know, he's like, oh, I was here because I was looking for all these places Maddie might have been. It's like, but also, like, honestly, I was following you. It's like, yeah, that's not creepy. Like, how do I know you didn't kill me? He's like, I kind of have a case of vertigo right now. I don't like heights. I'm like, hey, I sympathize. I'm once again, it's the whole conversation of not afraid of heights, more so about falling to my death type of thing. But, like, yeah, like, being higher up always kind of gives me, like, I always thought it just kind of made me, like, queasy. But I think vertigo is right terminology for it. But yeah, Nicole and Xavier actually ended up bonding. I wonder, like, in the time that Maddie was dating, because I don't think Simon ever got close to Xavier while him and Maddie were dating. But I wonder, is the same thing applicable with Nicole as well? But they ended up talking. And obviously it's about it, it's like, oh, you can kind of unplug. And it's like, yeah, I've been cleared of everything, but it doesn't matter. Everyone's kind of already made up their minds. And he feels like it's going to be a long, long time before people stop seeing him this way. It's like, oh, he must be having his hair that way to cover up his horns. Like, yeah, everyone's just assuming you did it. I mean, you were caught with her phone and all that other stuff, but it's like, it is that thing of like, oh, you can put out one statement and then maybe you make a statement later on, like retracting or correcting something, but a lot of people won't ever see that retraction or correction. The first thing is the one that got the pop, and there will always be a lot less like, oh, because you'd have to go out of your way to potentially find out, like, oh, this correction, this other statement was put out, that's a correction. Like, that happens on the internet a lot of time, and the same thing is applicable in this case. Like, hey, I have an alibi, so I couldn't have done anything to Maddie, but no one's going to care because everyone's kind of already made up in their mind that I'm responsible, so... But what also kind of cut deep for Nicole was when she found out that Xavier had gone to visit Maddie's mom, and it's like, wait, you did? It's like, yeah, I think she's kind of, we hung out for a little bit, and it's like, yeah, she's kind of going through it. It might have been her on Maddie's account that liked the photo, which we never got an answer for whether that was her or not, but maybe it was the case. But Nicole kind of felt bad. It's like, right, I was so caught up in all of this, I never once thought like, oh, I should probably check in on Maddie's mom. But it's like, hey, it's okay. Maddie's mom is like, you're here now, so... Because they feel like the cops aren't doing enough. Her in particular, because she feels like, because she knows for a fact that Xavier's dad is pulling back the resources on the search party. He's like, we're so unmanned with all the break-ins and stuff like that are happening. And it's just like, right, it feels like you're giving up on my daughter. It's like, yeah, especially at a time where you want to be focusing more on the re-election that's coming up. So the election that's coming up, so you're trying to focus on your re-election. So she feels like that's where his priorities lie. But all three of them, Maddie's mom, Xavier, and Nicole, were out there in the woods, and they found her ticket. The ticket she was showing off to Xavier like the day it all happened. But there's like a boot print on it, and it's like there's all the footprints nearby, and it's like, oh, was that Maddie's? It's like, so why would she be out here? Cause whatever the case, I mean, maybe it's a situation of she was called out there by somebody, or maybe she went there and encountered somebody, but she obviously had to have died at the school because that's where she's trapped at. So did someone bring her back to the school and kill her, or what? This, in conjunction with the Anderson stuff, really has brought forth a lot of questions. Once again, I don't think it's going to be Anderson. I still do think it's a red herring, but it might be a lot more closely tied than even I was thinking it might have been. I felt like, oh, there might be some tangential connection. It's like, I kept saying that, but it might be a lot more direct than I'm even giving that credit for. So we'll ultimately have to wait to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.